Sarah Chen had always believed that love was supposed to conquer all obstacles, but standing in the bridal suite at the Rosewood Manor, watching her childhood friends whisper and laugh while deliberately excluding her from their conversations, she wondered if some barriers were simply too high to climb. Sarah grew up in a cramped two-bedroom house on Maple Street, where her mother worked as a seamstress and her father drove a delivery truck for the local grocery store. Money was scarce, but dreams were abundant. Her parents taught her that dignity came from hard work, not from the size of your paycheck, and that treating everyone with respect was the only currency that truly mattered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. While her classmates spent summers at expensive camps, Sarah spent hers reading library books on the front porch and helping her mother with alterations. She learned early that happiness didn't require a trust fund, just the ability to find joy in simple moments and genuine connections with people who saw past surface appearances. Sarah met Emma Rodriguez during their freshman year at State University, where both girls had earned academic scholarships. Emma came from a similar background, the daughter of a restaurant cook and a hotel housekeeper, and they bonded over shared meals of ramen noodles and big dreams about changing the world. They were inseparable throughout college, supporting each other through late-night study sessions and celebrating every small victory together. After graduation, their paths began to diverge in ways neither had anticipated. Sarah took a job as a social worker, dedicating herself to helping families in crisis navigate the system and find stability. The pay was modest, but the work filled her with purpose. Emma, meanwhile, had caught the attention of a prestigious law firm during her internship, and within 2 years, she was making more money than both their fathers combined. The change in Emma was gradual but unmistakable. Designer handbags replaced her college backpack, expensive restaurants became her preferred dining spots, and her circle of friends expanded to include people whose names appeared in the society pages. Sarah tried to maintain their friendship, but increasingly felt like an outsider looking in on Emma's glamorous new life. When Emma announced her engagement to Marcus Wellington, heir to a real estate empire, Sarah was genuinely happy for her friend. Marcus seemed kind and devoted, and Emma glowed with happiness whenever she talked about him. Sarah assumed she would be chosen as maid of honor, given their long history and the promises they'd made to each other during college about always being there for life's biggest moments. Instead, Emma chose Vivian Ashworth, a socialite she'd met through Marcus's family connections. Sarah was asked to be a bridesmaid, which stung but seemed understandable given Emma's new social obligations. What hurt more was watching Emma transform into someone Sarah barely recognized, someone who seemed embarrassed by reminders of her humble origins. The engagement party at the country club was Sarah's first real glimpse into the world Emma was joining. She wore her best dress, a black cocktail number she'd saved for months to buy, but felt immediately out of place among women draped in diamonds and designer gowns. Emma's new friends were polite but distant, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes when they looked at Sarah. Vivian took every opportunity to remind Sarah of her place in the new hierarchy. During the bridal shower planning, she casually mentioned that certain venues might be too expensive for everyone to contribute to equally, her gaze pointedly resting on Sarah. When discussing bachelorette party destinations, she suggested places that would cost more than Sarah made in a month, then feigned concern about whether everyone could afford to participate. Sarah endured these slights in silence, telling herself that Emma's happiness was worth the discomfort. Her friend was living a fairy tale, and Sarah didn't want to be the person who introduced reality into Emma's perfect world. She convinced herself that once the wedding was over, things would return to normal between them. 3 months before the wedding, Sarah met David Kim at a coffee shop near her office. She was having a particularly difficult day, having just left a client meeting where she had to tell a single mother that her housing assistance application had been denied again. David was sitting at the next table, and when he noticed her frustrated tears, he quietly offered her his napkin and asked if she was okay. David worked in tech consulting, he told her, but he seemed more interested in hearing about her work than talking about his own. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle way of listening that made Sarah feel heard in a way she hadn't experienced in years. They started meeting for coffee regularly, then dinner, then long walks through the city where they talked about everything and nothing. What Sarah didn't know was that David Kim wasn't just any tech consultant. He was the founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies, a company that had revolutionized data security and made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. He lived simply by choice, drove a modest car, and preferred genuine connections to the superficial networking events that came with his wealth. David had learned early that revealing his fortune too quickly changed how people related to him. He'd watched too many relationships crumble under the weight of expectations and assumptions that came with money. With Sarah, he found something rare and precious, someone who cared about his thoughts, his dreams, and his character without any knowledge of his bank account. For 6 months, they built a relationship based on shared values and genuine affection. Sarah fell in love with David's quick wit, his passion for social justice causes, and the way he remembered small details about her day. He supported her work, celebrated her victories with families she helped, and never once made her feel like her modest salary diminished her worth. When David finally told her the truth about his wealth, Sarah was shocked but not deterred. The man she'd fallen in love with was the same person whether he had $10 or $10 billion. If anything, learning about his success made her respect him more, because she'd seen how he chose to use his resources to support causes that mattered, rather than flaunting his status. Their engagement was a quiet affair, just the two of them in the same coffee shop where they'd met. David didn't want a circus, and Sarah appreciated that he understood her well enough to know she'd prefer something intimate and meaningful over a grand gesture designed for social media. When Sarah told Emma about her engagement, her friend's reaction was complicated. There was genuine happiness mixed with something that looked almost like relief. Emma had been worried about how Sarah would fit into her new social circle, and marrying someone successful seemed to solve that problem in her mind. Emma insisted that Sarah and David attend her wedding as honored guests, and Sarah looked forward to finally introducing David to her oldest friend.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She hoped that seeing her happiness might remind Emma of their shared values and rekindle the authentic friendship they'd once treasured. The week before Emma's wedding, Sarah received a call that changed everything. Emma was crying, her voice shaky with distress. She explained that Vivian and the other bridesmaids had been pressuring her about the guest list, suggesting that some people might not fit the aesthetic they were trying to achieve for the wedding photos and social media coverage. Sarah's heart sank as she realized what Emma was trying to tell her. The other bridesmaids had convinced Emma that Sarah's presence might detract from the elegant atmosphere they'd worked so hard to create. They'd found her background and her previous wardrobe choices unsuitable for such an important social event. Emma was disinviting her from the wedding. The conversation was excruciating. Emma tried to soften the blow by suggesting they could celebrate separately, just the two of them, after the honeymoon. She claimed it was just about the optics, that it didn't reflect how she really felt about their friendship. But Sarah could hear the weakness in her voice, the way she'd already chosen her new life over their history together. Sarah hung up the phone feeling hollow and betrayed. The girl who'd once shared her deepest secrets and biggest dreams had just chosen social acceptance over 20 years of friendship. The worst part was understanding that Emma's decision revealed something fundamental about who she'd become, or perhaps who she'd always been underneath the surface. David found Sarah crying on their couch that evening, and when she explained what had happened, his jaw tightened with controlled anger. He'd seen how much Emma's friendship meant to Sarah, and watching someone he loved be treated so callously awakened something protective and fierce in him. He made a phone call that night, one that would change everything about Emma's perfect wedding day. But Sarah didn't know about that call, or about the plans David was quietly putting into motion. She only knew that her heart was broken and that the person she'd trusted most in the world had chosen status over substance when it mattered most. The morning of Emma's wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect day that seemed designed for fairy tale endings. Sarah tried to distract herself with work, but couldn't stop thinking about what should have been one of the happiest days in her best friend's life. Despite everything, she hoped Emma would find the happiness she was seeking, even if it came at the cost of their friendship. What Sarah didn't know was that across town, David was making final preparations for a confrontation that would expose the true cost of Emma's choices and force everyone involved to confront the difference between genuine worth and artificial status. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate love was about to become a lesson in loyalty, consequences, and the price of forgetting where you came from. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. The Rosewood Manor buzzed with pre-ceremony activity as guests filled the ornate chapel. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, while the string quartet played soft melodies that echoed through vaulted ceilings. Emma stood in the bridal suite, radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, surrounded by her bridesmaids who fussed over every detail of her appearance. Vivian adjusted Emma's veil with practiced precision, her reflection in the mirror showing complete satisfaction with how the day was unfolding. She had orchestrated every element of this wedding to perfection, from the guest list to the seating arrangements, ensuring that only the right people would witness Emma's transformation from scholarship student to society wife. The ceremony was set to begin in 30 minutes when the first sign of disruption appeared. Emma's wedding coordinator, Jessica, burst into the bridal suite with barely concealed panic on her face. She whispered urgently to Vivian, who immediately stepped away from the mirror with a frown creasing her perfectly applied makeup. Outside the chapel, 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the main entrance, their windows tinted so dark that no one could see inside. The vehicles bore no identifying marks, but something about their presence commanded immediate attention from the security staff. The valet attendants exchanged confused glances as no one emerged from the cars, which simply sat there like sleeping predators. David Kim sat in the middle vehicle, checking his phone one final time before setting his plan into motion. His assistant, Jennifer Park, sat beside him with a tablet containing all the information they'd need for what was about to unfold. Behind them, his head of security coordinated with the team spread across the other vehicles, ensuring every exit was monitored and every contingency planned for. David had spent the previous week learning everything there was to know about Vivian Ashworth and her influence over Emma's social circle. What he discovered had only strengthened his resolve to expose the toxic dynamics that had cost Sarah her oldest friendship. Vivian came from old money that was no longer as secure as she pretended, and she used social manipulation to maintain her position in circles where she increasingly didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on David that Vivian's family wealth had largely evaporated due to poor investments and extravagant spending, while she continued to play the role of gatekeeper to high society. Her desperation to maintain appearances had made her cruel to anyone she perceived as threatening her carefully constructed image. As the ceremony's start time approached, David finally stepped out of his vehicle. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of understated wealth rather than flashy display. His security team remained in their cars, invisible but ready, while Jennifer accompanied him toward the chapel entrance, carrying what appeared to be a simple leather briefcase. The effect of David's arrival was immediate and electric. Several guests near the entrance recognized him instantly, their conversations stopping mid-sentence as they processed the implications of his presence. Word spread through the crowd like wildfire that David Kim, the reclusive tech billionaire, was somehow connected to this wedding. Marcus Wellington's father, Richard, approached David with the kind of deference reserved for someone whose net worth commanded respect. He introduced himself with obvious curiosity about what had brought such a prominent figure to his son's wedding. David was polite but vague, simply stating that he had business to attend to before the ceremony began. Inside the chapel, the whispers grew louder as more people became aware of David's presence.
The society photographers who had been hired to capture the wedding suddenly found themselves much more interested in this unexpected guest than in their assigned shots of floral arrangements and architectural details. Emma, still in the bridal suite, remained unaware of the commotion David's arrival had caused. She was focused on the final preparations, her hands shaking slightly with pre-ceremony nerves as Vivian continued to reassure her that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The other bridesmaids echoed Vivian's confidence, creating an echo chamber of artificial calm. David made his way through the chapel, greeting guests who approached him while keeping his attention focused on identifying the key players in the drama that had unfolded over the past week. He spotted Emma's parents near the front, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding them, but proud of their daughter's achievement in landing such an advantageous marriage. The processional music began, signaling that the ceremony was about to commence. David took his seat in the back of the chapel, positioning himself where he could observe everything while remaining relatively inconspicuous until the moment was right. Jennifer sat beside him, the briefcase at her feet containing documents that would reshape everyone's understanding of the relationships and power dynamics at play. Emma appeared at the back of the chapel, escorted by her father, looking every inch the perfect bride. Her dress flowed behind her like liquid silk, and her smile radiated the happiness of someone who believed she was stepping into her fairy tale ending. The assembled guests rose to their feet, cameras flashed, and the string quartet swelled into the traditional wedding march. As Emma walked down the aisle, David studied the faces around him. He saw genuine joy from Emma's family and Marcus's relatives, but he also noted the calculating expressions of Vivian and her social circle, who seemed more focused on the networking opportunities and photo ops than on celebrating the couple's love. Marcus waited at the altar with obvious adoration for his bride, and David felt a moment of sympathy for the young man who had no idea that his wedding was about to become ground zero for a reckoning that had been building for months. Marcus genuinely loved Emma, and his feelings were about to be tested in ways he never could have anticipated. The officiant, Reverend Thompson, began the ceremony with traditional words about love, commitment, and the joining of two families. The assembled guests settled into their seats, expecting to witness a conventional society wedding that would provide them with gossip material for months to come. None of them suspected that they were about to become participants in a drama that would redefine their understanding of worth and loyalty. Emma and Marcus exchanged their personal vows, speaking of dreams shared and futures envisioned together. Their words were heartfelt and genuine, a reminder that beneath all the social maneuvering and status seeking, there was a real relationship between two people who cared deeply for each other. David found himself hoping that their love would survive what was about to unfold. When Reverend Thompson reached the traditional question about whether anyone present knew of any reason why the couple should not be wed, the chapel fell into the expected silence. This was typically a ceremonial moment, a relic from earlier times that served no real purpose in modern weddings. No one anticipated that anyone would actually speak up. David Kim rose to his feet. The movement sent a ripple of shock through the assembled guests. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and even the string quartet faltered in their playing. Emma's face went white beneath her veil as she turned to see who had dared to interrupt her perfect moment. Marcus looked confused and concerned, his hand reaching protectively toward his bride. Vivian's expression transformed from serene satisfaction to barely controlled panic as she realized the careful orchestration of the day was about to be demolished. She had worked too hard to create this perfect tableau to allow some tech entrepreneur, no matter how wealthy, to disrupt her masterpiece. David's voice carried clearly through the chapel's acoustics. "I don't object to this marriage," he began, his tone calm but commanding immediate attention. Emma and Marcus clearly love each other, and that love deserves to be celebrated. What I object to is the cruelty that has masqueraded as friendship in the lead-up to this day. The silence that followed was deafening. David stepped into the aisle, Jennifer beside him, with the briefcase now open, revealing a stack of documents and photographs. Every eye in the chapel was fixed on them as David continued speaking. A week ago, the bride decided that her oldest friend wasn't suitable to attend this wedding. Someone who had supported her through college, celebrated her successes, and been a constant source of loyalty and love for 20 years was deemed unworthy of witnessing this moment because she didn't meet certain aesthetic standards. Emma's knees buckled slightly, and Marcus reached out to steady her. The color had drained from her face as she realized that her decision to disinvite Sarah was about to be exposed to everyone present. She looked desperately toward Vivian, seeking some way to contain the damage, but Vivian was frozen in her own horror. David held up a photograph that Jennifer handed him. "This woman," he said, showing the image to the assembled guests, "worked 2 jobs to help pay for Emma's textbooks. She was the first person Emma called when she got into law school, when she landed her first job, when she met Marcus. She has never asked for anything in return except friendship." The photograph showed Sarah and Emma at their college graduation, arms around each other, beaming with pride and possibilities. The contrast between that moment of genuine connection and the current situation was stark and undeniable. Vivian finally found her voice, standing up from her front row seat with indignation blazing in her eyes. "This is completely inappropriate," she declared, her voice cutting through the chapel. "This is Emma's wedding day, and whatever personal grievances you have should be addressed privately, not in front of everyone." David turned his attention to Vivian with the kind of focused intensity that had made him legendary in business negotiations. "You're absolutely right that this should have been addressed privately," he agreed.
Unfortunately, you and your friends chose to make Sarah's exclusion a public spectacle, discussing her inadequacies at multiple social events leading up to today. He nodded to Jennifer, who handed him another document. "I have statements from 3 different sources confirming that you encouraged Emma to disinvite Sarah because her presence would, quote, lower the tone of the event and might result in unflattering photographs that could damage Emma's entry into proper society." The words hit Vivian like physical blows. She had indeed made those statements, confident that they would never leave the closed circle of her social group. The idea that someone had been documenting her manipulations filled her with panic and rage. Emma finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "David, please don't do this. Not here, not now." David's expression softened as he looked at the bride. "Emma, you were Sarah's best friend. She loved you enough to step aside quietly when you asked her to, even though it broke her heart. She didn't fight back, didn't cause a scene, didn't try to expose what you'd done to her. She protected your happiness even when you destroyed hers." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice confused and hurt. "Emma, is this true? You uninvited someone from our wedding?" The question hung in the air as Emma struggled to find words that could explain her actions without revealing the depth of her betrayal. She looked around the chapel, seeing the faces of guests who were now viewing her with curiosity and judgment rather than celebration and admiration. David continued, his voice gentle but relentless. "The woman you discarded is named Sarah Chen. She's a social worker who has dedicated her life to helping families in crisis. She volunteers at homeless shelters, mentors at-risk teenagers, and somehow still finds time to support the people she cares about. She's also my wife." The revelation sent another shockwave through the assembled guests. The tech billionaire's wife was the same person Emma had deemed unworthy of attending her wedding. The implications hit different people at different speeds, but the collective realization was devastating. Vivian stumbled backward as if she'd been physically struck. She had orchestrated the exclusion of someone whose husband could buy and sell her family's remaining assets without noticing the expense. Her careful social calculations had not just been morally wrong, they had been spectacularly stupid. David reached into Jennifer's briefcase and pulled out his phone. "Sarah doesn't know I'm here," he said, beginning to dial. "She thinks she's spending today trying to forget about the friend who chose social climbing over loyalty, but I think she deserves to hear Emma explain her decision personally." Emma's voice cracked as she pleaded,
David, please, I can explain everything. It wasn't my idea. I was pressured. I never wanted to hurt Sarah. Then tell her that yourself, David replied, holding out his phone as it connected to Sarah's number. The phone rang 3 times before Sarah's voice filled the chapel through the speaker function. David, is everything okay? You sound like you're in a strange place. Emma broke down completely, sinking to her knees in her wedding dress as the weight of her choices crashed down on her. The perfect day she had envisioned was crumbling around her, but more importantly, she was finally confronting the person she had become in her pursuit of social acceptance. Marcus knelt beside his bride, his face a mixture of confusion, hurt, and protective instinct. The man who had planned to pledge his life to Emma was discovering sides of her character that he had never seen before, and the revelation was forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved. The chapel remained frozen in stunned silence as Sarah's voice continued to float through the space, asking if David was all right and whether he needed her to come wherever he was. Her concern for her husband's well-being, even without understanding the situation, provided a stark contrast to the selfishness that had characterized the events leading up to this moment. David looked around the chapel one final time, his gaze settling on each person who had participated or enabled Sarah's exclusion. "This is what real love looks like," he said quietly. "It protects, it supports, it stands up for the people who matter, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Sarah has shown that kind of love to Emma for 20 years. Today, I'm returning the favor." The reckoning that followed would reshape every relationship in that chapel, but for the first time in months, David felt confident that justice and loyalty had finally prevailed over status and appearances. The ceremony had been stopped, but something far more important had been revealed about the true nature of love, friendship, and the courage required to stand up for what's right.